This is something I don't normally do. I like to be the man behind the curtain, or the man behind the book, as it were. But I have a book here that's one that I deeply love, that isn't very well known, and I want to share it with you. Now, most of you, especially those of you who have followed my native work, probably know, Voices in the Stones, and the trilogy, which is, of course, Neither Wolf Nor Dog, The Wolf at Twilight, and The Girl Who Sang to the Buffalo. Love these books. I think they're wonderful books. And a lot of you do too. But this book, Native Echoes, is a different beast. It's more liturgy than literature. And in that way, what I mean in that is that it has prayer, it has reflection, and it has story, like a good liturgy. It's a liturgy of the land, as it were. It's called Native Echoes, Listening to the Spirit of the Land. I like to call it my quiet child, the child that doesn't like to speak in public. It's been loved by the people that have found it. Robert Bly, the poet, who doesn't blurb things very often, wrote, "The book tells a genuine truth about land and people, a rare and honest work." Eric Friesen from Minnesota Public Radio, who became the main classical music host in Canadian Broadcasting System, would give copies of it to friends and actually used it on the air. And at some point in the future, I'll probably put one of his usages of it online so you can hear what he did with it. And I think that the St. Paul Pioneer Press got it right when they called it poetry of thought that begins and ends with a belief in the spiritual. What I want to do is read you a piece from this book. This piece is called Copse. It's one of my favorite pieces in the book. It's about a moment when I was driving through the prairies of North Dakota in deep winter. And it was one of those moments that touched me almost like an epiphany. I always loved driving the plains. I always loved driving in winter. I love that little edge of fear that comes from being out in a place where the space is so large and singular that there's almost nothing to see. It's almost the pure force of weather and nature, and you're just a dot against it. Copse is about that. It starts with a poem from a Delaware saga, the Delaware people. It freezes where they abode. It snows where they abode. It storms where they abode. It is cold where they abode. Delaware saga. The horizon is a line across a phantom sky. The wind-blown fields stretch towards infinity. Fragments of cornstalks, brittle shards, stick through the snow and bend and rattle, and the wind is the largest thing, the only thing. In the distance, copses of trees stand like battlements, isolated, alone, small islands against the prairie sky. On the far horizon, purpling night has started its descent too soon. There will be no sunset, for there has been no sun, only pale light, weak and without source. Snow-blown, blinding, aluminum, it leaves without a vent, giving way to dark. The wind rises up, sensing an ally. It is filled with banshee howls, screams, and distant laughter. Amid the copses, single lights go on in farmhouses miles apart. One, then another, as if in signal. Fingers of snow drift across the road. Lose the road, lose your life, the old farmers said, and the snow is drifting, drifting. Attention takes a fine edge now. There is no room for error. A man was found last week a half mile from his house. A man was found last week, but a half mile from his car, frozen. 2 weeks they had searched. A gust of wind had revealed his hand, as if clutching or waving. It is the swing that stops me. It hangs and twists by a single strand from the arm of a great oak, far back amid a shadowy copse. Behind it, almost lost in darkness, I see the house, abandoned, sway-backed, empty. I should not stop. This is not a night to challenge. but something cries out for witness. The wind screams in outrage as I step outside. The shadows of the trees grasp at me as I walk. Movement is hard. My steps punch through the frozen crust. I sink in up to my knees. The wind lashes my face. My chest heaves. Snow burrows in at my ankles, sending waves of pain as the icy wetness cuts the flesh, then begins to freeze. So little time, so little time. The door is heavy, rude planks covered by torn tar paper, wedged half open. Drifts have heaved against it in a frozen wave. In a weathered eave, a wasp's nest rattles gray and ragged. I push hard. The door scrapes open. A froth of snow whisks across the floor. Wolf tracks or dog mark a single line to a far corner. Scat covers the floor. Is he here? Holes have been punched in the walls. The windows are gone. A sink hangs from its plumbing, kicked, perhaps, or hammered. In a corner, a stove stands covered with dust and mouse droppings. Its oven door is open, a cry into the night. On the floor, a book is flapping. The pages turn and rustle in the wind, then settle for a moment. I touch it with my foot. It is brittle. Pages detach and scatter. One flies up against a wall where it flutters like a dying bird, desperate to escape. Through an empty window, I can see the swing, twisting in the winter dark. The wood is gray as bone and frozen. That someone thought there was a life to be lived here, that for one brief moment hands were joined in common effort, and from each hammer blow, each chop of axe, rang out a song of hope. I see them rise before me, the father planting shelter bands of trees and planning yields and harvests, the mother at the stove cooking dinners, baking bread, and the children at the swing, called in for dinner from summer play. Did they have bicycles? Did they ride horses down the road to that next far house among that next far copse, that next small island in this eternal flatness? Did they camp out on warm summer nights, counting the stars and finding messages in an owl's call? Did cicadas sing them to sleep? Did their father take them aside in a moment of fine hope and tell them, someday this will all be yours, and mean it as a gift? And did they sit there listening, thinking in the simple colors of their childhood how good it would be to someday work this land? Or did they, with each visit to a city or nearby town, say, someday I will leave? And what of the night that it was decided? At the table, amid long silences, who was it that said, enough, we cannot go on? Was it the woman, wide-eyed and hysterical from too many days alone in this too awful space? Or was she the happy one, hanging clothes in the summer air and gathering her children to her in the evening, while her husband sat vacantly, adding up figures, projecting yields, cursing bankers and God? Did he one day walk in and say, it is finished, there will be no more? Or was it something far darker that broke their will? Is there, beneath these snows, a tiny grave, a tragedy too great to be borne? Or did they all, like the pages of the book, simply turn frail and blow away? I step among the boards. It is wrong to be here. There is no humility in this defeat, only shame. This is life that wants to be forgotten. The darkness has risen now and looms across the land. There is only the great cold and the shadows and the wind. Whispers of snow have almost hidden the road. The copse, the house, are disappearing. Darkness is folding them in, like sleep, like death. I retrace my steps. Already my marks are being erased. They too have lost their shape. I drive in silence, listening to the wind. In the distance, a church stands lonely in an empty field. It is small, white, boarded up against the winter dark. By its side, a tiny graveyard sits inside a wire fence. There are no tall monuments. Such presumption would be unseemly. Only a few low stones poking humpback through the swirling snow. Far behind, almost lost in shadow, a single cross stands half buried in the winter night. The wind swirls angrily around it, as if to hide it from my view. I squint my eyes as if there is something I have not yet seen. But there is no life anywhere, only the wind and the dark, and the stark arm of the single cross protruding, beckoning, like a frozen hand above the drifting snows. That was Copse. It's one of my favorite pieces in the book. when I go back to it now, it paints a picture for me. It paints a picture of a place. It paints a picture of the spiritual presence of the land, the difficulty, the loneliness, the hope. It has a depth to it that always touches me when I go back and read it. If you're interested in stories like this, and you're interested in this sensibility, I hope you will seek out this book, Native Echoes, Listening to the Spirit of the Land. You can order it from my sister's website, wolfnerdog.com, or you can get it from Amazon or from any of your independent bookstores. I don't know how long I will keep this edition in print or how many I will print, but this is my edition. This is the way I want this book to look. This is the way I want this book to read. This is the way I want this book to feel. And I'd like to share it with those of you who appreciate this kind of work. I think it's a wonderful book, and I hope you'll seek it out. Thanks so much.